I will not fly with an 11-year-old in my co-pilot's seat. Captain Morrison's voice echoed across the hangar. This is insane. You're a child. You have no training, no experience, no business being in that aircraft during a catastrophic emergency. I don't care what anyone says, this is absolutely unacceptable. Before you watch full story, comment down from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty tarmac of Clearwater Regional Airfield on Saturday, October 14, 2025, at 6:47 a.m. It was a modest facility nestled in the high desert of Nevada where serious aviation enthusiasts came to pursue their passion far from the congested airspace of major cities. The small airfield hummed with its usual Saturday activity, mechanics working on engines, pilots performing pre-flight checks, and the occasional Cessna taxiing toward the single runway that stretched across the red earth like a gray ribbon. Among the various hangars and tie-down areas, one particular aircraft stood out for those who knew what to look for, an experimental home-built aircraft designated November 7-4 Tango Charlie, a sleek composite design that represented thousands of hours of meticulous work by its builder, Thomas Chen, an aerospace engineer who had poured 7 years of his life into creating his dream aircraft. 11-year-old Maya Chen sat on a weathered wooden bench outside Hangar 12, her sneakers swinging above the oil-stained concrete as she waited for her father to finish his conversation with Jim Baxter, the airfield manager. Maya's dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore her favorite aviation t-shirt depicting the Wright Flyer, a gift from her father on her 10th birthday. She had spent countless weekends at this airfield over the past 7 years, watching her father transform sheets of composite material, aluminum tubing, and thousands of components into a flying machine. Her father emerged from the office, his face creased with concern, walking quickly toward the hangar where his pride and joy sat gleaming in the early morning light. Thomas Chen was a methodical man in his early 40s, with graying hair at his temples and the careful, precise movements of someone who spent his professional life ensuring that aircraft components met exacting specifications. "Maya, honey, I need you to stay here at the hangar," Thomas said, his voice tight with urgency as he began his pre-flight inspection with unusual haste. "There's been an accident up at the Carson mine. A tunnel collapse. They need immediate medical evacuation for 3 injured workers, and the regular air ambulance is grounded with mechanical issues. The backup helicopter is 2 hours away responding to another emergency near Reno." Maya slid off the bench, her eyes widening. "The Carson mine? That's up in the mountains, right? Past Pinewood Ridge?" "Exactly. It's rough terrain, high altitude, and there's a storm system moving in from the west. They need someone now, not in 2 hours." Thomas moved around his aircraft with practiced efficiency, checking control surfaces, examining the propeller, testing the fuel samples. "Jim asked if I could make the flight. The mine has a decent dirt strip that can handle my aircraft, and with the lightweight composite construction, I can land shorter than most planes this size." "Are you taking someone with you?" Maya asked, knowing that for emergency operations, having a second person aboard was standard practice, especially in challenging conditions. "That's the problem. Mark Sullivan was supposed to fly right seat, but he called in sick this morning. Food poisoning. Everyone else who's qualified is either already airborne on other flights or out of town for the weekend." Thomas completed his walk around and opened the canopy of his aircraft. "I'm going solo. No choice." Before Maya could respond, a dusty Ford pickup truck skidded to a stop near the hangar, and a tall man in his 50s jumped out, wearing a leather flight jacket despite the morning warmth. Captain Rick Morrison was a former Air Force pilot who now flew charter operations out of Clearwater, a man known for his by-the-book approach to aviation and his no-nonsense attitude about safety. He strode toward Thomas with quick, purposeful steps. "Chen, I heard about the Carson mine situation," Morrison called out. "Jim told me you're planning to make the run, but you don't have a co-pilot." "I'm volunteering. My aircraft is down for its annual inspection, but I've got plenty of experience with experimental aircraft. I can read instruments and handle emergency procedures if needed." Thomas looked relieved. Rick, that would be incredible. I wasn't looking forward to going solo into those mountains with weather moving in. Let me brief you on the aircraft systems. She's got some unique characteristics. No time for a full briefing, Morrison said, climbing toward the aircraft. We need to launch in the next 10 minutes if we're going to beat that storm front. I've logged over 10,000 hours in everything from fighters to turboprops. I'll figure out your systems en route. Maya watched as the two men prepared for departure, and something nagged at her memory. She had been present for every test flight her father had conducted, had listened to him explain every modification and custom system he had incorporated into the aircraft's design. She knew Captain Morrison was an excellent pilot, but she also knew that her father's aircraft was unlike any other plane at the airfield. Thomas was hauling medical supplies and emergency equipment from his truck, loading them into the baggage compartment while Morrison settled into the right seat, familiarizing himself with the panel layout. Maya could see him studying the instrument arrangement, the mixture of modern glass displays and backup analog gauges that Thomas had installed with typical engineering redundancy. "Dad," Maya called out, but Thomas was focused on securing the medical supplies, ensuring they were properly restrained for the flight. She tried again, louder this time. "Dad, did you show Captain Morrison the auxiliary fuel pump override?" Thomas paused, glancing back at his daughter. "Maya, not now. We're in a hurry." But Maya persisted, her voice taking on an edge of concern. "What about the backup electrical bus configuration? The emergency oxygen system deployment sequence? The modified landing gear extension procedure?" Morrison looked down from the cockpit, his expression showing mild irritation. "Young lady, I appreciate your concern, but I've been flying aircraft since before you were born. Your father's plane might have some custom features, but basic aviation principles don't change. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have people who need help." Maya bit her lip, wanting to argue but knowing that adults rarely listened to 11-year-olds when they were convinced they knew better. She stepped back as Thomas climbed into the left seat, running through his startup checklist with practiced efficiency. The engine coughed once, then roared to life, the propeller becoming a blur as it spun up to idle speed. Thomas gave Maya a quick wave, then focused his attention on the instruments, preparing for departure. The aircraft taxied toward the runway, and Maya felt a knot of worry tightening in her stomach. She had been in that right seat dozens of times during her father's test flights and local flying. She knew every switch, every circuit breaker, every backup system and emergency procedure. Captain Morrison might have thousands of hours of experience, but he didn't know this specific aircraft. She walked back toward the hangar, watching the aircraft complete its run-up at the end of the runway, the sound of the engine cycling through its power checks echoing across the airfield. Then the engine noise increased to full power, and the sleek aircraft accelerated down the runway, lifting off smoothly and climbing toward the mountain ranges that dominated the eastern horizon. Maya stood watching until the aircraft became a small speck against the morning sky, then disappeared entirely. Inside the hangar office, Jim Baxter was coordinating communications with the Carson mine, relaying updates on the incoming medical evacuation flight. Maya could hear the radio chatter, the mine supervisor's grateful acknowledgement that help was on the way, the weather reports indicating that the storm front was moving faster than initially predicted. She sat down on the worn couch in the corner of the office, picking up one of the aviation magazines scattered on the coffee table but unable to focus on the articles. 45 minutes passed, then an hour. Maya knew the flight to Carson Mine should take approximately 70 minutes each way, depending on winds and weather conditions. She helped herself to a soda from the office refrigerator, listening to Jim handle radio calls from other aircraft in the pattern, the normal rhythm of a busy Saturday morning at a small airfield. At 8:23 a.m., the radio crackled with her father's voice, the transmission broken and strained with interference from the mountains. Clearwater traffic, November 7-4 Tango Charlie, approximately 40 miles northeast, inbound with 3 passengers, medical emergency. "Jim, we've got a situation up here." Jim grabbed the microphone immediately, his professional calm masking obvious concern. "Tango Charlie, this is Clearwater, go ahead with your traffic." Thomas's voice came through again, and this time Maya could hear the stress underlying his words. We successfully picked up the injured miners, but we're encountering severe turbulence and icing conditions. The storm front moved in faster than predicted. I'm deviating south to try to find clearer air, but we're getting significant ice accumulation on the wings and control surfaces. Maya sat up straight, her heart beginning to pound. Ice accumulation was one of the most dangerous conditions an aircraft could encounter, adding weight, disrupting airflow over the wings, and potentially jamming control surfaces. She knew her father had installed a sophisticated ice protection system during the aircraft's construction, but it required proper activation and management to be effective. Morrison's voice came over the radio, and Maya could hear tension in his tone. "Clearwater, this is the co-pilot in Tango Charlie. We need to activate the ice protection systems, but the configuration in this aircraft is unlike anything I've seen. Chen is busy flying the aircraft through these conditions. We need technical support on the emergency procedures for this specific airframe." Jim looked around the office, his face showing the strain of the situation. "Tango Charlie, stand by. We'll get you technical support." He grabbed the phone, dialing rapidly. "I'm calling Bill Henderson. He helped Thomas with some of the electrical systems during the build. Maybe he can talk Morrison through the procedures." But Maya was already moving toward the radio console, her small hand reaching for the microphone. Jim looked at her, hesitant, but something in her expression made him pause. "Mr. Baxter, let me talk to them. Please." "Maya, this is a serious emergency. The adults need to handle this. I know my dad's aircraft better than anyone except my dad," Maya said, her voice steady despite the fear she felt for her father's safety. "I was there for every phase of construction. I watched him install every system. I know the emergency procedures." Jim hesitated, torn between protocol and the desperate situation developing in the mountains. Before he could decide, Thomas's voice came through again, more urgent this time. "Clearwater, we're losing altitude. The ice is affecting our lift, and I'm having trouble maintaining control. We need those system procedures now." Maya didn't wait for permission. She grabbed the microphone, keying the transmit button. "Dad, this is Maya. I'm here. I can help." There was a moment of stunned silence on the radio, then Morrison's voice, sharp with disbelief and anger. "What? Clearwater, what is going on? You're putting a child on the radio during an emergency situation. This is completely inappropriate. We need qualified technical support, not a kid." Thomas's voice came through, strained but controlled. "Rick, that's my daughter. Maya, honey, you shouldn't be on the radio right now. Let Mr. Baxter handle this." But Maya held on to the microphone, her voice gaining confidence. "Dad, I know your aircraft. Captain Morrison, the ice protection system has 3 stages. First, you need to activate the electric heating elements on the leading edges. The switch is on the overhead panel, right side, marked Wing Heat. It's a 2-position switch with a guard. Flip the guard up first, then move the switch to the high position." Morrison's voice came back, skeptical but desperate enough to listen. "I see the switch. But there's also a circuit breaker panel here with multiple breakers labeled for heating systems. Which ones need to be in?" Maya closed her eyes, visualizing the aircraft's electrical panel that she had seen hundreds of times. "There are 3 breakers for the ice protection system. They're on the right side of the breaker panel, about halfway down. They're labeled Wing Heat Primary, Wing Heat Secondary, and Prop Heat. All 3 need to be in. But check the ammeter on the main panel first. If you're showing more than 70 amps total load, you need to shed some electrical load before activating all the heating elements, or you'll overload the alternator." There was silence on the radio, and Maya imagined Morrison checking the instruments, trying to process information from an 11-year-old girl while the aircraft bucked through turbulent, icing conditions. Then his voice came back, grudging respect creeping into his tone. The ammeter is showing 52 amps. I'm activating the breakers now. Wing heat is coming on. Thomas's voice followed, focused on flying but taking a moment to transmit. Maya, how do you know all this? You've been paying attention in the hangar, but this is detailed technical information. Dad, I've been studying your aircraft manual every night before bed for the past 2 years, Maya said simply. I know every system, every procedure, every emergency checklist. I know it because it's important to you, and I want to understand what you built. Jim Baxter stared at Maya with a mixture of astonishment and concern, but he didn't take the microphone away from her. The radio crackled with the sound of wind and engine noise as Thomas fought to maintain control of the aircraft through the challenging conditions. Morrison came back on the radio, his voice less skeptical now but still urgent. The wing heat is activated, but we're still accumulating ice. Is there a backup system or additional procedures we should be following? Maya thought quickly, remembering the discussions her father had had with other builders about ice protection strategies. Captain Morrison, the wing heating elements need about 3 minutes to reach full effectiveness. While you're waiting, Dad should reduce airspeed to just above the stall speed for your current weight and configuration. Slower airspeed means less ice accumulation. Also, there's a propeller anti-ice system. On the center pedestal, there's a knob marked Prop Anti-Ice. Turn it to the on position. It uses alcohol to prevent ice buildup on the propeller blades. I see it, Morrison replied. Activating propeller anti-ice now. There was a pause, then his voice came back with a note of surprise. Thomas, the prop is clearing. The vibration we were experiencing is smoothing out. Thomas transmitted, his voice still tense but showing relief. Good. Maya, what about engine ice protection? I'm seeing some roughness in the engine operation that might indicate carburetor ice. Dad, you don't have carburetor ice, Maya said confidently. You installed a fuel injection system, remember? You specifically chose fuel injection because it doesn't have carburetor ice issues. The engine roughness is probably from the extreme cold affecting the fuel mixture. You need to enrich the mixture slightly. Move the mixture control about 1/4 inch toward full rich. Morrison spoke up, his voice now showing genuine respect. How old did you say this girl is? She's providing better technical support than some aircraft mechanics I've worked with. Thomas made the mixture adjustment, and the engine smoothed out immediately. Maya's 11. And yes, she apparently knows my aircraft better than I realized. Maya, honey, we're starting to see some improvement in the ice situation. The wing heat is working, and the ice is beginning to shed. But we're still in instrument meteorological conditions with heavy clouds, and we need to find a way out of this weather. Maya grabbed the aviation sectional chart that hung on the office wall, studying the terrain between the aircraft's last reported position and Clearwater. Dad, what's your current altitude? We're at 9,500 feet, and I've been unable to climb due to the ice accumulation. Now that the ice is clearing, I might be able to get higher and find clearer air. Maya traced her finger along the chart, calculating distances and elevation. Dad, if you climb to 11,000 feet, you should be above the freezing level, and the clouds might be thinner up there. But be careful about climbing too fast with the injured passengers. They might not tolerate rapid altitude changes well. Jim Baxter leaned over Maya's shoulder, looking at the chart. He picked up another microphone connected to the weather service. Let me get you current conditions and the freezing level. He made the call, speaking quickly with the weather briefer, then transmitted to Thomas. Tango Charlie, current freezing level is reported at 10,200 feet. If you can make it above that altitude, you should be in better conditions. Thomas acknowledged, and over the next several minutes, Maya and the others in the office listened to the transmissions as the aircraft climbed slowly through the challenging conditions. Morrison provided periodic updates on the ice protection systems, following Maya's guidance on managing the electrical load and monitoring the heating elements for proper operation. At 8:47 a.m., Thomas's voice came through with obvious relief. Clearwater, Tango Charlie is level at 11,500 feet, and we've broken out on top of the cloud layer. We've got clear skies above us, and the ice has completely shed from the airframe. We're heading direct to Clearwater, estimating arrival in 35 minutes. The office erupted in relieved smiles and a collective exhale of tension. But Maya knew the flight wasn't over yet. Landing with injured passengers, after the stress of the icing encounter, still presented challenges. She kept the microphone in her hand, waiting. The next 20 minutes passed with routine position reports as Thomas navigated toward Clearwater, staying above the clouds but monitoring the weather conditions below for a suitable descent point. Maya listened carefully to each transmission, noting the professionalism in her father's voice but also hearing the underlying fatigue that came from intense concentration during an emergency. At 9:12 a.m., Thomas made his initial approach call. Clearwater traffic, November 7-4 Tango Charlie is 20 miles north, 11,500 feet, beginning descent for landing runway 23, Clearwater. Jim had already called the local ambulance service, and Maya could see the flashing lights of 2 emergency vehicles parked near the runway, ready to transport the injured miners to the regional hospital as soon as the aircraft landed. Other pilots at the airfield had heard the radio transmissions and gathered near the terminal building, watching the northern sky for the approaching aircraft. But then Morrison's voice came over the radio, tense with a new concern. "Clearwater, we have a problem." During the descent, the landing gear extension handle was moved to the down position, but we're only showing 2 green lights on the gear indicator. The nose gear shows unsafe, and we can see through the inspection port that it hasn't fully extended. Maya felt her heart sink. Landing gear problems were serious, potentially catastrophic if not resolved. Jim grabbed the microphone. "Tango Charlie, can you recycle the gear? Try raising it and extending it again." Thomas replied, "We've tried cycling the gear 3 times. Same result. 2 mains are down and locked, but the nose gear won't extend." Rick is looking through the inspection port with a flashlight, and he says the gear appears to be partially extended but not locked. Morrison added, "I've never seen a gear system like this. There's a mechanical backup system, but I can't figure out how it's configured. The pilot's operating handbook doesn't have clear diagrams for the emergency extension procedure." Maya's mind raced through everything she remembered about her father's landing gear system. Thomas had designed and built a custom gear mechanism that was lighter and more reliable than standard systems, but it had unique characteristics and emergency procedures. She pressed the transmit button. "Dad, Captain Morrison, I know what to do. The emergency gear extension system on this aircraft is manual mechanical backup. There's a red handle on the floor between the seats, near the co-pilot's right leg. It's covered by a protective cover marked emergency gear." Morrison responded, "I see the handle. What's the procedure?" Maya visualized the system as she had seen her father demonstrate it during ground testing. "First, make sure the normal gear extension switch is in the downed position. Then remove the protective cover from the emergency handle. Pull the handle straight up until you feel resistance. That releases the uplocks. Then push the handle forward with steady pressure. You're manually extending the nose gear through a cable system. It will take about 20 strong pumps of the handle to fully extend the gear. Count each pump out loud so Dad knows your progress." Thomas transmitted, his voice reflecting trust in his daughter's knowledge despite the desperate situation. "Maya, are you absolutely certain about this procedure? We're trusting your memory with our lives and the lives of these injured men." "Dad, I'm certain," Maya said, her voice unwavering. "I watched you test this system 6 times on the ground. I helped you lubricate the cables. I know exactly how it works." Morrison began the emergency extension procedure, his voice counting out loud over the radio. 1, 2, 3. The handle is moving, but I'm not seeing any change in the gear position yet. 4, 5, 6. His counting continued, the effort evident in his voice as he manually pumped the heavy handle, forcing the nose gear down against aerodynamic forces. 15, 16. This is hard work. The resistance is significant. 18, 19, 20. Maya gripped the microphone, holding her breath. She knew that around the 20th pump, the gear should lock into position if the system was working correctly. The entire office was silent, everyone listening intently to the radio transmissions. 22, 23. Wait. I see movement in the inspection port. The gear is extending further. 25, 26. Morrison's voice showed strain but also growing hope. Thomas, check your indicator lights. Thomas's voice came back immediately, filled with relief. 3 green. We have 3 green lights. Nose gear shows down and locked. Rick, you did it. Maya, you did it. The office erupted in cheers, and Jim Baxter put his hand on Maya's shoulder, squeezing gently in recognition of what she had accomplished. But Maya didn't celebrate yet. The landing still had to be completed successfully. Dad, with the stress the aircraft has been through, you should make a gentle landing, Maya transmitted. The gear was extended through the emergency system, so you won't have the normal hydraulic cushioning on touchdown. Keep your touchdown speed about 5 knots higher than normal, and make the landing as soft as possible. Copy that, Maya. We're setting up for a long, gentle approach to runway 23. The aircraft appeared in the southern sky, descending through scattered clouds at a shallow angle. Maya ran outside with Jim and the others, watching as her father skillfully guided the aircraft toward the runway. The approach was perfect, the aircraft tracking the centerline with precision despite the stress of the emergency flight. The main wheels touched first with barely a chirp, then the nose gear settled gently onto the runway as Thomas carefully lowered the nose. The aircraft rolled out smoothly. As the aircraft taxied toward the emergency vehicles, Maya ran across the ramp, arriving just as Thomas shut down the engine. The canopy opened, and her father climbed out stiffly, clearly exhausted from the intense flight. Behind him, Morrison was helping the injured miners exit the aircraft, their faces pale and strained but grateful to be safely on the ground. The paramedics moved in immediately with stretchers and medical equipment. Thomas pulled Maya into a fierce hug, holding her tightly. You saved us, baby girl. You saved all of us. Morrison approached, his weathered face showing deep respect as he looked at Maya. Young lady, I owe you an enormous apology. When I heard a child on the radio trying to provide technical support during an emergency, I thought it was the most irresponsible thing I'd ever witnessed. I was angry, frustrated, convinced that we needed real expert help. He shook his head slowly. But you knew that aircraft better than anyone. Better than me with all my experience. Better than any technician who might have read the manual. You knew it because you lived with it, grew up with it, learned every system through years of watching your father build it. Maya felt her face flush with embarrassment at the praise, but she looked Morrison steadily in the eye. Captain Morrison, my dad taught me that knowing an aircraft isn't just about flying it. It's about understanding every component, every system, every emergency procedure. He taught me that respect for aviation comes from knowledge and preparation. Jim Baxter joined them, along with several other pilots who had witnessed the emergency landing. Thomas, Maya, that was the most remarkable display of resourcefulness and knowledge I've ever seen at this airfield. Maya, you provided technical support that saved lives today. How you managed to remember all those details, all those procedures, at your age, is simply extraordinary. Thomas kept his arm around Maya's shoulders. She's been my constant companion during this entire building project. Every weekend, every evening I worked in the hangar, she was there. Asking questions, taking notes in her journal, studying the plans and systems. I thought she was just curious, just spending time with her old man. I had no idea she was absorbing all of it at such a deep level. One of the other pilots, an older woman named Sarah Mitchell who flew a restored Stearman biplane, approached Maya with a smile. Young lady, you demonstrated something today that a lot of pilots never learn. You showed that true mastery of an aircraft comes from intimate knowledge, not just from logging hours. Your father built an amazing machine, but you learned that machine from the ground up, literally. Morrison nodded in agreement. When I got into that right seat, I was confident that my experience would be enough. I've flown dozens of different aircraft types, handled countless emergency situations. But I didn't know this specific aircraft, didn't understand its unique systems and procedures. Maya understood that distinction. The paramedics finished loading the injured miners into the ambulances, and the senior paramedic came over to thank Thomas for making the difficult flight. Mr. Chen, the mine supervisor, told us that without immediate evacuation, these men might not have survived. The injuries were serious, and the conditions at the mine made proper medical treatment impossible. You risked your life to bring them out. Thomas shook the paramedic's hand. I'm just glad we made it back safely. It was a team effort, and my daughter was a critical part of that team. As the ambulances pulled away, Morrison began helping Thomas secure the aircraft and conduct a post-flight inspection. They found evidence of the ice accumulation that had plagued the flight, scoring on the leading edges where ice had formed and then shed, signs of stress on the control surfaces from the turbulence. Morrison examined the emergency gear extension handle, testing its movement. This is an ingenious system, Thomas. Simple, mechanical, reliable. But without knowing it was there and how to use it, we would have been facing a gear-up landing with injured passengers aboard. The whole aircraft is full of systems like that, Thomas explained. Custom solutions to standard problems, incorporating ideas I learned from 30 years in aerospace engineering. But those custom systems require custom knowledge. An experienced pilot can fly the aircraft under normal conditions without much difficulty, but in an emergency, knowing the specific systems and procedures becomes critical. Later that afternoon, after the emergency had passed and the aircraft had been secured in its hangar, Thomas sat down with Maya on the weathered bench where she had waited that morning. The October sun was warmer now, and the airfield had returned to its normal weekend rhythm. Maya, I need to talk to you about what happened today, Thomas said seriously. You saved lives, and I'm incredibly proud of you. But I also need to address something important. When Captain Morrison and I were in that aircraft facing those emergencies, you became our lifeline to critical information. You were only 11 years old, sitting in an office, but you carried the weight of our survival on your shoulders. That's an enormous responsibility for a child. Maya looked at her father, seeing the concern in his eyes. Dad, I was scared. Really scared. But I knew your aircraft, and I knew that knowledge might be the difference between you coming home or not. I couldn't not help. I understand that, and you made the right choice. But this experience has made me realize something. I've been building this aircraft with you by my side for 7 years, teaching you about systems and procedures, sharing my passion for aviation. But I never fully appreciated that you were learning at such a deep level. Are you saying I learned too much? Maya asked, feeling a flicker of concern. No, absolutely not. I'm saying that you've demonstrated a level of understanding and maturity that goes beyond your years. But with that understanding comes responsibility. The knowledge you have about this aircraft is valuable, potentially life-saving as we saw today. But it's also a burden. Maya thought about this, understanding what her father meant. Dad, I don't want to stop learning about your aircraft. I don't want to stop being part of your aviation life. Today was scary, but it also showed me that knowledge matters. Understanding matters. Being prepared matters. Thomas smiled, pulling her close. You won't stop learning, and you'll always be part of my aviation life. But from now on, we're going to make sure that your knowledge is formally documented. We're going to create detailed emergency procedure checklists, system documentation, everything. Not just for you, but for any pilot who might fly this aircraft. Over the following weeks, Thomas and Maya worked together to create comprehensive documentation for November 7-4 Tango Charlie. They produced detailed checklists for normal operations and emergency procedures, with clear diagrams and step-by-step instructions. They created a video walkthrough of all the aircraft's systems, with Maya often serving as the narrator, explaining the purpose and operation of each component. Captain Morrison became a frequent visitor to Hangar 12, and he formed an unlikely friendship with Maya. He began bringing her books about aviation history, aircraft design, and emergency procedures. "You've got a gift," he told her one Saturday morning. "Not just for memorizing information, but for understanding systems in a deep, intuitive way. That's rare at any age, but especially at 11. Captain Morrison, can I ask you something?" Maya said. "When you first heard me on the radio, you were really angry. You thought having a kid provide technical support was wrong and dangerous. Do you still think that?" Morrison considered the question carefully. "Maya, I was wrong about you specifically, but I wasn't wrong about the general principle. In most emergency situations, having an untrained child involved in critical decision-making would be dangerous and inappropriate. The difference in your case was that you possessed specific, detailed knowledge that no one else had. You weren't trying to provide general advice or make decisions beyond your knowledge. You knew your father's aircraft better than anyone except your father, and that specific knowledge was exactly what we needed. So it's about matching knowledge to the situation." "Exactly. If you had tried to advise us on general flying techniques or navigation decisions, that would have been inappropriate. But you stuck to what you knew, what you had learned through years of direct experience with that specific aircraft. That's the distinction that made your help valuable rather than dangerous." Maya nodded, understanding the nuance. "So knowing your limitations is as important as knowing your strengths. That's one of the most important lessons in aviation, and in life. A pilot who knows what he doesn't know is safer than a pilot who thinks he knows everything." The story of Maya's role in the emergency spread throughout the aviation community, first locally and then more widely as aviation publications picked up the account. Some people praised her knowledge and quick thinking, while others raised concerns about the appropriateness of relying on a child during an emergency. The debates often missed the central point: Maya's knowledge was unique and specific, earned through years of patient observation and study. Thomas received a letter from the Federal Aviation Administration acknowledging the successful emergency handling and requesting copies of the enhanced documentation that he and Maya had created. The FAA examiner who reviewed the materials commented that the level of detail and clarity in the emergency procedures could serve as a model for other experimental aircraft builders. 6 months after the emergency, in April 2026, Maya attended the annual Experimental Aircraft Association fly-in at the Clearwater Airfield. Hundreds of home-built aircraft filled the ramp, representing thousands of hours of work by dedicated builders from across the region. Thomas had been asked to give a presentation about emergency preparedness and documentation for experimental aircraft, and he insisted that Maya join him at the front of the room. Standing before an audience of experienced pilots and builders, Maya felt her nervousness fade as she began talking about what she had learned. She explained how growing up in the hangar had given her a unique perspective on aircraft systems, how watching the building process had taught her not just what components did but why they were designed that way. When the emergency happened, Maya told the audience, "I wasn't trying to be a hero or show off what I knew. I was just trying to help my dad come home safely. Every piece of information I gave Captain Morrison came from specific memories, watching my dad install the wing heating elements and explaining why he positioned them that way, helping him test the emergency gear extension system and counting the pumps it took to fully extend the nose gear." An older gentleman in the front row raised his hand. "Young lady, what you're describing is experiential knowledge, the kind that comes from being present during the creation process. But how do we ensure that knowledge is preserved and available when the original builder might not be around?" Thomas stepped forward to address the question. "That's exactly why Maya and I spent months creating comprehensive documentation after the emergency. We realized that the knowledge she carried in her head needed to be externalized, written down, illustrated, and made accessible to anyone who might fly the aircraft." Maya added, "And when we were creating the documentation, we tested each other. Dad would present a hypothetical emergency situation, and I would have to walk through the response using only the written procedures, without relying on my memory. If the procedures weren't clear enough for me to follow from the documentation alone, we revised them until they were. A woman in the back of the room stood up. I've been building a Vans RV-7 for the past 4 years, and my teenage son has been helping me with the project. After hearing about what happened with your emergency, I started teaching him the systems more deliberately. Last month, we discovered a wiring error during the electrical system testing that could have caused serious problems in flight. My son spotted it because he remembered the load calculations we had discussed. He's 15, and he potentially saved our lives before we ever left the ground. Stories like this began emerging from throughout the experimental aircraft community. Parents and children working together on building projects with a new appreciation for the educational value of the experience, builders creating more thorough documentation, pilots seeking out specific knowledge about the aircraft they flew rather than relying solely on general aviation experience. Maya's own aviation journey continued. On her 12th birthday, Thomas gave her a logbook and began logging the time she spent in the right seat of November 7-4 Tango Charlie during local flights. She wasn't manipulating the controls yet, that would come later with proper instruction, but she was observing, learning, understanding the practical application of all the theoretical knowledge she had accumulated. Knowledge without discipline is dangerous, Thomas told her during one of their flights over the Nevada desert. You know this aircraft's systems better than most mechanics, but that doesn't mean you're ready to fly it solo. Flying requires judgment, situational awareness, decision-making skills, and muscle memory that only comes from proper training and supervised experience. Maya understood the distinction. The emergency had taught her that specialized knowledge had value, but it had also taught her the importance of knowing your role and your limitations. She had been able to help during the crisis because she stuck to providing specific technical information about systems she knew intimately. She hadn't tried to give flying advice, make navigational decisions, or step beyond her expertise. Captain Morrison continued to visit the hangar regularly, and he became an unofficial mentor to Maya. He would bring scenarios from his extensive flying career and discuss them with her, not expecting her to have the answers but encouraging her to think through the problem systematically. Aviation is all about managing risk and making decisions with incomplete information, he explained. The more knowledge you have, the better your decisions can be, but knowledge alone isn't enough. You need experience to develop judgment. The injured miners who had been rescued during that emergency flight recovered fully, and they sent Thomas a heartfelt letter of thanks months after the incident, expressing gratitude not just for the rescue but for the skill and dedication that had made it possible. They included a gift for Maya, a handcrafted wooden model of November 7-4 Tango Charlie, built by one of the miners who had taken up woodworking during his recovery. The model sat on a shelf in Maya's room, a reminder of the day when her patient years of observation and learning had translated into action that saved lives. As Maya entered her teenage years, her relationship with aviation continued to evolve. She began taking formal ground school classes, studying for the written exam that would eventually be part of her pilot certification process. She discovered that her hands-on knowledge of aircraft systems gave her a significant advantage in understanding the theoretical material. Concepts that other students struggled with made intuitive sense to her because she had seen the practical applications during the building process. Thomas watched his daughter's development with pride and occasional concern. He wanted to support her aviation interests, but he also wanted to ensure she had a well-rounded education and explored other possibilities. Maya, you know I love that you're interested in aviation, but I don't want you to feel like you have to pursue flying just because it's what I do. You should explore other interests, other career possibilities. Dad, I love aviation, but I'm also interested in engineering, in understanding how things work and why they're designed the way they are, Maya replied. Maybe I'll become an aerospace engineer like you. Maybe I'll become a pilot. Maybe I'll do something completely different. But learning about your aircraft taught me how to learn, how to observe, how to think systematically about complex problems. Those skills will be valuable no matter what I end up doing. That perspective reflected the deeper value of Maya's experience. Yes, she had acquired specialized knowledge about one particular aircraft, and yes, that knowledge had proven life-saving during an emergency. But more importantly, she had learned how to learn, how to acquire deep knowledge about complex systems, how to recognize the difference between general principles and specific implementations, how to communicate technical information clearly to others. Captain Morrison offered his own perspective during one of their hangar conversations. Maya, what happened during that emergency changed my approach to aviation in fundamental ways. I had always prided myself on being able to adapt to any aircraft, any situation. I thought experience was the ultimate credential, that time in the cockpit was what made a pilot truly capable. But you taught me that specific knowledge matters, that understanding the particular can be more valuable than mastering the general. But experience still matters, doesn't it? Maya asked. I mean, I could provide information about the aircraft systems, but you were the one who had the experience to make good decisions under pressure, to keep the aircraft under control in terrible conditions, to manage all the different problems happening simultaneously. Absolutely. Experience matters enormously. But experience without specific knowledge is incomplete, just as knowledge without experience is theoretical. The ideal is combining both, which is what your father has achieved with his aircraft. He has the engineering knowledge from building it and the flying experience from testing and operating it. That combination is what makes him such a capable pilot in his own aircraft. As the months passed and became years, the story of that October morning in 2025 became part of aviation lore, retold in hangar conversations and pilot forums, analyzed in aviation safety courses, referenced in discussions about experimental aircraft documentation. But for Maya and Thomas, it was simply a part of their ongoing journey together, a dramatic chapter in a longer story about family, knowledge, passion, and the incredible machines that humans build to defy gravity. Years later, when Maya was applying to college and writing essays about formative experiences, she would reflect on that October morning and what it had taught her. She wrote about the value of sustained engagement with complex subjects, about the importance of curiosity and observation, about the unexpected ways that knowledge acquired for its own sake can become critically important, about the bonds that form between parents and children when they share genuine passion for something meaningful. But perhaps most importantly, she wrote about the lesson that expertise and knowledge come in many forms, that credentials and age don't always correlate with understanding, that sometimes the most valuable knowledge is possessed by those who take the time to truly see and comprehend the details that others overlook. She wrote about learning to trust her own knowledge while remaining humble about its limitations, about speaking up when she had something valuable to contribute while staying quiet when others knew better, about the delicate balance between confidence and humility that marks true expertise. The story of an 11-year-old girl who helped guide her father's aircraft through a life-threatening emergency by drawing on years of patient observation and learning became more than just an aviation anecdote. It became a reminder that knowledge matters, that attention to detail matters, that patient observation over time can yield understanding that rivals or exceeds that gained through formal credentials, and that sometimes the most unlikely people possess exactly the expertise that desperate situations require. November 7-4 Tango Charlie continued to fly through Nevada skies, a testament to one man's engineering skill and dedication, and to the surprising journey of his daughter who learned an aircraft so thoroughly that she could guide it home from the ground when emergency struck. The aircraft carried more than just its pilot and passengers. It carried the story of how specialized knowledge, acquired through years of patient observation, could prove life-saving when circumstances demanded exactly that expertise and nothing else would suffice. And in hangars and airfields across the country, other builders and their children continued the tradition, working together on aircraft projects, sharing knowledge across generations, creating bonds strengthened by common purpose and mutual respect. Maya and Thomas's story had reminded them that these projects were about more than just building aircraft. They were about building relationships, creating shared experiences, and passing down knowledge in ways that honored both the technical complexity of aviation and the human connections that give that knowledge meaning and purpose. The sun set over Clearwater Regional Airfield on countless evenings after that dramatic October morning, painting the sky in colors of orange and purple, illuminating the aircraft tied down on the ramp and secured in their hangars. Among them, November 7-4 Tango Charlie rested quietly, its composite surfaces reflecting the fading light, its systems and components embodying years of careful work and the intimate knowledge that had saved lives when that knowledge mattered most. And in the hangar beside it, Maya and Thomas continued their work together, learning, building, growing, and passing on the lessons that would ensure their story continued to inspire others long after their own flights had ended.